The storm hit Oak Hollow like it meant to wipe it off the map. Rain pelted rooftops, trees bent like old men in prayer, and thunder pealed across the valley in jagged bursts. The streets were empty, lights off, curtains drawn. No one wanted to be awake for this kind of night. Inside the Oak Hollow police substation, fluorescent bulbs flickered over desks stacked with paperwork and stale coffee. Lieutenant Logan Reese stood alone in the squad room, the only sound a soft hum from the radio and the steady tick of the second-hand wall clock. Except for Ranger. The 6-year-old German shepherd had been standing sentinel by the door for over an hour, unmoving, ears rigid, eyes trained on the north-facing window. He hadn't barked, he hadn't whined, but something in his posture sent a ripple down Logan's spine. The dog wasn't anxious. He was deliberate. He was listening. Logan tore open the envelope he'd found slipped under the station's front door only minutes earlier. No name, no return address, just one line scrawled in shaky block letters. The children still cry beneath her floor. He read it again, then a third time. In most towns, that kind of message would have been brushed off as a sick prank. But not here, not in Oak Hollow. Ranger took a step forward, slow and purposeful. His paw touched the edge of the threshold, body leaning slightly toward the rain-streaked glass as if gravity had shifted. "You picking up something I can't?" Logan asked under his breath. Ranger didn't answer with sound. He never did. He just stared, past the window, past the storm, past the illusion that nothing was wrong. Logan followed the dog's gaze and already knew what he'd see. The Bell Farm. 2 miles north, past the tree line and Buckner Creek, sat a white farmhouse with a red barn and a wraparound porch that had been in every local calendar since 1992. Clarissa Bell lived there, widow, church deacon, organizer of the town's holiday food drive, and founder of a small orphan placement program. The kind of woman who made casseroles for widowers and handed out blankets during blackouts. And yet Ranger wouldn't stop staring at her property. Not the house. The barn. Logan exhaled. The rain intensified like someone had turned up the volume. He tugged on his jacket, grabbed the leash from the wall, and clipped it to Ranger's collar. "Let's go." Ranger didn't move. Not an inch. Instead, he placed his left paw firmly on the floor, eyes never leaving the storm-lit window, as if to say, "Not yet. You're not listening hard enough." Lightning cracked. For a fraction of a second, the entire valley lit up, and Logan swore he saw movement near the silhouette of the barn's roof. A sliver of shifting shadow. He tightened his grip on the leash. "You're telling me we've got something real out there?" Ranger finally looked up at him. No wag, no tension, just that steady gaze. Logan had seen this look once before, during a hostage recovery, 6 years back. A girl had been locked in a shipping container in the back of a semi. No screams, no sound, but Ranger had known. And he hadn't moved from that trailer's side until they opened it. Same look, same stillness. The station radio crackled to life. "Unit 4, minor collision on Route 9. No injuries. Tow en route." Logan didn't respond. His eyes were on the envelope again. The children still cry beneath her floor. He checked his watch. 10:12 p.m. The freight train would be rolling through the valley in 2 minutes. It always passed near Bell Farm. Always. Suddenly, Ranger growled, deep, low, barely audible. Not at the door, at the floor beneath him. Logan blinked. The hell? Ranger pawed the linoleum once, then backed away from the door. Not toward it, away. As if something outside was coming, but something beneath them had just spoken. Then a sound, so faint it could have been a gust. Or a breath. Number It was a voice. A soft, broken sob. Ranger spun to face the floorboards, his entire body tensed. He lowered himself until his chest touched the tile, one ear flattened forward, the other twitching like a satellite dish. The floor of the substation had always creaked, but now Logan heard it too, beneath the layers of storm and static, a tremor. Not thunder, not pipes, something else. A message trying to push through silence. Ranger stood up slowly, turned his head toward Logan, then toward the door, and finally he moved, but not to leave. He walked to the front mat, sat, and faced the door like a soldier at post. Refused to budge, refused to let Logan pass, until the lieutenant understood. There was something more here, something under the surface, under the town's trust, under Clarissa Bell's painted smile. Logan slipped the envelope into his coat pocket. "We're going out there, tonight." Ranger stood. The leash hung loose between them, but it didn't matter. This wasn't a walk. This was a reckoning. The road to Bell Farm was slick with rain, mud curling up at the edges of the tires as Logan's cruiser crept down the gravel lane. The storm had passed, but the sky still hung low, thick with leftover grey. Ranger stood in the back seat, steady, eyes alert, as if he knew they were nearing something important. At the end of the lane, the white farmhouse stood like a postcard, perfectly trimmed hedges, fresh paint, porch swing swaying just enough to feel alive. Clarissa Bell was already on the steps when Logan killed the engine. She wore a pressed blouse and a soft blue shawl, pearls around her neck, catching the early light. "Lieutenant Reese," she said before he even reached the porch. "This is a surprise." Logan showed his badge anyway. "Sorry to drop in unannounced, Ma'am. We got a tip. Thought I'd follow up personally." "About what?" Her smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes flinched. "We've had no trouble here. Not since the generator blew out last winter." Ranger padded up beside Logan, silent but unmistakably present. Clarissa's eyes landed on him. "And this is Ranger," Logan said. "My partner." "Well, aren't you handsome?" She said lightly, though she didn't step forward. "Is he friendly?" "He's discerning," Logan replied. The woman's smile thinned just a little. "Of course. Come in. Would you like coffee?" "Appreciate it, but this'll be quick. I'd like to walk the property if you don't mind." Clarissa hesitated, barely a blink. Then she stepped aside, motioning toward the yard. "Of course. Feel free." They moved past the house, across the neatly mowed lawn, and toward the old outbuildings. The barn loomed off to the left, faded red boards leaning with age. But Ranger didn't head that way. He veered toward the smaller shed behind it. Tin roof, padlocked door, a coil of hose hanging beside it. Logan narrowed his eyes. "That your storage shed?" Clarissa followed his gaze. "Just tools, old things, rusty junk my husband couldn't part with." Ranger approached the door, nose working the bottom edge, body low but not crouched. His ears turned forward, tail still. He pawed once at the step. Just once, then stopped, stared. "He's interested in something," Logan said. "Probably a raccoon," Clarissa answered. "We've had them sneaking in after storms. He'll smell anything." But Ranger didn't act like he'd found a raccoon. He backed up slightly, sat, and placed one paw on the dirt in front of the door. Not aggressive, not excited, intent. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Logan asked. Clarissa folded her hands in front of her. "I'd rather you didn't, not without a warrant." Her tone was still polite, but firmer now, controlled. "It would save a lot of paperwork," Logan said. "I'm sure it would. But I do have my rights, Lieutenant." Ranger looked up at Logan and gave a low breath, the kind he used when he'd already done the math and knew the answer. His body stayed coiled, not tense, but ready. Logan nodded once and stepped back. "All right, I'll log the visit. Just needed to be sure." Clarissa gave a soft, practiced smile. "You're just doing your job." Logan looked once more at the shed. The lock was old, but recently oiled. No rust on the loop, no wear on the keyhole. Someone had been careful. Too careful for old junk. He looked down at Ranger. The dog hadn't moved, still watching the door, still waiting. Clarissa stepped beside them. "Is there something I should be worried about, Lieutenant?" "Not unless there's something I should be," Logan said calmly. Her eyes didn't change. "Would you like coffee after all?" "No, thank you." Ranger finally rose, but slowly, reluctantly. He gave the door one final glance, then turned, his movement deliberate, like he was leaving something unfinished behind. They walked back to the cruiser in silence. Logan opened the door. Ranger hopped in but didn't settle. His body stayed high, eyes still on the shed until it was out of view. As Logan slid behind the wheel, his phone buzzed. "Block number," he answered. A voice, young and shaky, whispered through the speaker. "You're close," it said, but she moved them. Click. Deadline. Logan stared at the screen. Ranger let out a single huff from the back seat. The rain started again. Light at first, but it carried weight. The morning after the visit to Bell Farm broke slow and grey. Mist hung over Oak Hollow, like a question no one wanted to answer. Logan pulled his cruiser into the parking lot of Parker's Market, a quiet corner store where the gossip moved faster than the bread rack. He didn't need supplies. He needed time to think. And coffee strong enough to cut through a night spent re-watching the same minute of memory on loop. Ranger waited in the front seat, head resting on the windowsill, eyes trained on the street like he was guarding more than just a car. Inside, Logan grabbed a cup, nodded to the clerk, and moved to the bulletin board near the entrance, pretending to read the usual mix of lost pets, yard work ads, and bake sale flyers. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Clarissa's shed. The lock that was too clean. Ranger's refusal to move. Behind him, the bell over the door jingled. He didn't turn. Not until he felt a tug on his jacket. He looked down. A girl. No more than 10. Dark eyes, black hair in a long braid, a sweatshirt too big for her frame. She didn't speak. Just looked at him, then reached into her sleeve and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slipped it into his coat pocket with the kind of movement that came from practice, not fear. And then she was gone. Out the door. Across the lot. Vanishing into the alley behind the hardware store without ever glancing back. Logan stepped outside. Ranger was already out of the car, standing beside the open door, tail low, body alert. He'd seen her too. Logan unfolded the paper. Block letters. Pencil pressed hard enough to leave grooves. They take us when the train whistles. For a second, all the noise in the world seemed to vanish. The 10:14 freight, the one that passed through town every Thursday night, the one that had blown its horn just before Ranger locked onto the shed at Bell Farm. He looked over at his partner. "You caught that, didn't you?" He murmured. Ranger didn't move. His ears twitched toward the north, the direction of the tracks, and then back toward Logan. A conversation without words. He climbed into the cruiser, placed the paper on the dash, and started the engine. Back at the station, Logan ran her face through the orphan intake files. There she was. Isla Tran. Age 10. Placed at Bell Farm 11 months ago after mother's overdose. Status: under foster supervision. Last check-in? Nearly 2 months back. No red flags, no complaints, just quiet. Too quiet. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting, to the wall clock. 10:14. He had dismissed the train before. Background noise. A ghost sound that rolled through town and stirred nothing but dust. But Isla's note changed that. And so did the look on Clarissa's face the night before when the whistle cut through the dark. She'd paused, just for a second. but long enough for Logan to see something flicker behind the softness in her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, recognition, like a cue had been given. Ranger padded across the room and sat by Logan's feet. He didn't rest. He watched. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance, softer this time. A storm pulling itself back together. Logan glanced at the paper again. He flipped it over. Nothing. No name. No smudge. Just the message. They take us when the train whistles. He said it out loud, testing the rhythm. It didn't feel like a child's story. It felt like a schedule, and someone had missed their ride. Ranger stood. He walked over to the map on the wall, sat beneath it, and stared at the pinned rail line cutting through the top half of Oak Hollow. Then he looked back at Logan, and waited. By the time Logan turned off Buckner Road and onto the gravel drive of Bell Farm, the morning sun had just broken through the mist. The light didn't soften the place. It only made the lines sharper, the shadows deeper. He drove slow, window cracked, letting Ranger sniff the wind as they approached. The search warrant sat folded on the passenger seat, signed an hour earlier by Judge Hulstrom, who hadn't asked many questions, just read Logan's summary, then quietly pushed his coffee aside and said, "Go." Clarissa Bell stood on her porch like she'd been waiting all morning. Her expression was calm, almost too calm, and she wore the same pearls as before. A porcelain mug rested in her hands. She didn't smile. "You're early," she said. "I brought paperwork this time." Logan replied, stepping out of the cruiser. He handed her the folded document. "Signed and stamped. We'll need access to all buildings on the property." Clarissa opened the paper, read the first few lines, then closed it. "You always did take your work seriously." "I'm just following up." She nodded, stepped aside, and gestured toward the yard. "As you wish." Ranger didn't wait for permission. He stepped out of the cruiser, nose to the wind, and moved with purpose toward the far side of the barn. Not the shed, not the tool shed, the animal stall, the same one he'd sat in front of 2 nights ago, the one with the old boards and the oil-slicked hinges. Clarissa watched him go, then turned back to Logan. "You're wasting time, Lieutenant. There's nothing here but rust and regret." "I'll let him be the judge of that." Logan followed Ranger's path through the grass, boots sinking slightly into soft dirt. When he reached the stall, Ranger was already there, standing motionless, body tense, ears forward. His tail didn't wag, he didn't sniff around like he had at the shed. He just stood in front of the far wall, staring at the floor. "You've been here before," Logan muttered. Ranger lowered his nose. Then, without a sound, he placed both front paws against the planks and pressed down gently. Then he growled. Not a warning, not a threat. It was quieter, lower, a sound soaked in grief. Logan crouched, brushing aside hay and straw. Beneath the layer of bedding, the floorboards looked older, darker, some warped, some reinforced. One corner had scuff marks Logan hadn't noticed before. Small semicircles, as if something round had been turned over and over. He pulled a utility knife from his belt and worked it under the edge of the middle board. It gave more easily than expected. Too easily. "Jesus," he whispered. There, hidden beneath the straw and planks, was a rusted iron ring bolted into the center of the floor, worn smooth at the edges, polished by hands. Logan glanced back. Clarissa was still at the porch, unmoving. He wrapped his fingers around the ring and pulled. The floor gave with a sound like an old wound tearing open. Dust and cold air spilled upward. Ranger let out a low rumble, then took a step back, body angled between Logan and the hole. A staircase descended into blackness, stone walls slick with moss and time. The air that rose was damp and heavy. Logan could taste metal on the back of his tongue. Clarissa hadn't moved, She was still watching. Logan clicked his flashlight on and looked down the shaft. Rough-hewn stairs dropped into shadow. The beam caught old nails, damp cobwebs, and something darker along the side wall, an iron hook embedded into stone. Ranger stepped forward and placed one paw on the top stair. His ears were back now, body low, but not in fear, in reverence, in pain. Logan glanced over his shoulder again. Clarissa was gone. Damn it! He grabbed the radio from his shoulder. Unit 3 to dispatch. Suspect Clarissa Bell leaving Bell Farm on foot or vehicle, possibly armed. Do not engage alone. I repeat, do not engage alone. He clipped the radio back and looked at Ranger. The dog was waiting. Logan rested a hand on his partner's back. Let's go see what she was hiding. They descended together, into air that hadn't been touched in years, into cold silence that wasn't empty. It was waiting. The steps creaked beneath their weight, each one carrying the echo of boots and paws into the dark below. The air grew colder with every foot down, thick with the scent of damp stone and something fouler, metal, rot, the ghost of bleach not strong enough to cover what it tried to erase. Logan held his flashlight steady, cutting a cone of light through the black. Ranger moved just ahead of him, careful, silent, his nails clicking faintly against the stone. He didn't sniff. He didn't explore. He followed a line only he could see. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a chamber no bigger than a backyard shed. Stone walls bowed inward, uneven, sweating moisture. A single overhead bulb hung from a wire, long dead, coated in cobwebs. The room was bare, mostly. In the center stood a chair, metal frame bolted to the floor, leather straps hanging from its arms and legs. The buckles were tarnished, but the wear patterns were unmistakable. The leather was cracked and darkened where it had been pulled tight too many times. Logan's throat tightened. Ranger circled the chair once, slow, then turned toward the wall to the right. He walked to it, lowered his head, and pressed his body against the stone like he was trying to melt through it. "What do you hear?" Logan whispered. Ranger didn't respond with sound. He just stayed there, ears angled forward, nose barely grazing the surface. Logan swung the flashlight across the rest of the room. Chains, short, rusted links bolted directly into the far wall, hanging slack. At the end of one, a shackle still clung to the loop, bent slightly out of shape. Below it, a dark smear marked the stone. Old blood. Flaked, brown, dry, but still enough to know. Something happened here. Number someone. Ranger let out a low vibration in his chest. Not a growl, not fear. A sound of recognition. Like grief, remembered in bone. Logan stepped closer to him, pressing his hand against the wall where the dog leaned. For a moment, nothing. Then, a tremor, barely there, smaller than a breath, a pulse in the stone. Logan froze. There it was again, a faint, rhythmic vibration, too steady for coincidence. Not a pipe, not wind, not anything natural. A sound trying to be silence, a cry trying to stay hidden. "Jesus," he murmured. Ranger looked up at him, eyes sharp, tail still. Logan crouched, placed his palm flat against the wall, and waited. The vibration was real, a whisper beneath the skin of the stone. And it wasn't coming from the room they were in. It was coming from beyond it. Another wall, another room, or another prison. He stood, stepped back, and scanned the stone. No seams, no hinges. Just old rock and earth packed tight from generations of storms and silence. He reached for the radio. "Unit 3 to dispatch. Confirm backup en route. I need one more set of eyes down here, and get me thermal if we have it." Static, then a crackled voice. "Copy. Units in motion. ETA 6 minutes." Logan lowered the radio and turned back to Ranger, who hadn't moved an inch. You heard them before we did, Logan said. The dog blinked once, then turned his head back to the wall and stayed there. A sentinel. A judge. And somewhere behind the cold, something waited to be found. By midday, Clarissa Bell had vanished. Neighbors swore they saw her SUV leaving town just after dawn, heading south on County Line Road. The gas station clerk said she paid cash, filled up, and bought a folded map of West Virginia. No one remembered her speaking, just moving with practiced ease, like she'd packed for this moment years ago. The whispers traveled faster than patrol cars. Within hours, Child Protective Services flagged inconsistencies in Bell Farm's orphan placement records. Gaps, overlapping names, and worst of all, children marked transferred, with no receiving agency ever listed. Missing. Erased. Logan sat in his office, the weight of it crawling under his skin. The town didn't want to believe it. Not Clarissa. But the silence from those kids in the dark room said more than she ever would. Ranger lay near the window, alert, but still, watching the light shift through the blinds, as if waiting for the next piece to fall into place. That piece arrived in the form of an old name on a new file. Peter Hargrove. A pediatric neurologist turned rural consultant, he had moved into a converted farmhouse a few miles west of Bell Farm. He kept a small clinic, specialized in developmental trauma, took in referrals quietly, paid in grants and private donations, including, it turned out, a sizable check signed by Clarissa Bell 6 months earlier. Logan checked the timestamp on the 10:14 train. Still scheduled, still on the rails. He grabbed his gear. "We're going," he told Ranger. The shepherd stood immediately. No stretch, no shake, just motion. Like the time had come. Hargrove's property looked innocuous. White siding, trimmed hedges, a wraparound porch dressed in wind chimes and hanging planters. The kind of place meant to say, peace. Ranger didn't buy it. The second Logan opened the cruiser door, the dog leapt out and headed not toward the front steps, but around the right side of the house. Nose low, body tight. He wasn't tracking a scent. He was chasing memory. Logan called in his approach but didn't wait for backup. He followed Ranger along the gravel path and past a cluster of overgrown hydrangeas. The dog stopped near the side entrance of the house, where a set of basement windows sat half-covered in mulch and debris. Ranger nosed the edge of one vent and growled. Logan crouched, sweeping the leaves away. Beneath the grime was a narrow metal grate, screwed into the concrete. Not ventilation, a false cover. The edges had fresh scratch marks. Someone had opened this recently. Frequently. He stood and moved to the side door. It was locked. Not bolted. Locked. Logan raised his fist. The man who opened the door wore wire-rimmed glasses and a crisp white shirt. His hair was neat. His smile attempted warmth but landed closer to neutral. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Dr. Hargrove." Logan held up his badge. "Lieutenant Reese, Oak Hollow PD. I need to take a look around your property." "Do you have a warrant?" "Not yet." "Then I'm afraid I can't let you in." Ranger appeared behind Logan, planting himself beside the doorway. His ears flicked once, then he turned his head, nose toward the floor of the house, and let out a low, restrained growl. Not performance. A warning. "Your dog seems tense," Hargrove said, stepping slightly, behind the door. "He's rarely wrong." "I'm sure you understand, Lieutenant. We live by rules." "Some of us," Logan said. He turned without another word, backed off the steps. Ranger followed, tail rigid. Once out of sight of the front windows, Logan ducked to the basement window again. This time, he pressed his ear to the glass. Faint. Too faint. But there, a low hum, not mechanical, not electrical, rhythmic, human, breathing. "Dispatch," he said into the radio. I need an emergency warrant and 2 backup units to the Hargrove residence. Probable cause based on auditory confirmation and prior connection to Bell suspect. Lock the perimeter. Do not let him leave. Copy. Ranger nosed the grate again, then pawed at the dirt beside it. Logan followed the motion. The soil had been disturbed, packed down, then raked over. Show me, he said. Ranger dropped to his chest and started digging. Minutes later, they hit the edge of metal. A hatch, hand-built, reinforced. Logan pried the edge with a crowbar from the cruiser. It took force, leverage, and grit. The door groaned. Beneath it, a set of stairs led into black. No lights, just cold. And deeper still, the unmistakable smell of antiseptic and fear. Logan clicked on his flashlight. Ranger stepped forward first, descending into the dark. The hallway below wasn't wide. Concrete walls, bare bulbs overhead, none turned on. Doors lined the left side, steel doors, each labeled with letters and numbers. Not names, not people, subjects. The last door was ajar. Ranger stopped there, ears forward, tail straight. He didn't move. Inside, the room was a lab. Shelves with vials, syringes, lined notebooks, a cot in the corner, a scale, a locked refrigerator, surgical lights above, turned off but ready. On the desk, a file. Logan opened it. Subject, Lane, Isla. Age, 10. Transfer, pending. Status, hold. He stared at the photo stapled to the front. Same girl, same braid, same eyes, the one who handed him the note. They take us when the train whistles. Logan looked up. Ranger was already moving back towards the hallway, nose in the air. The sound of footsteps above. The race had started, and 10:14 was coming fast. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow across the makeshift lab. Everything about the space felt wrong. Too clean, too prepared, too practiced. It wasn't built in panic. It was built with planning. Logan stood shoulder to shoulder with Special Agent Miriam Kessler from the FBI's Child Exploitation Task Force. She flipped through the folders laid out on the steel table, her gloved fingers moving quickly, precisely. There's a pattern, she said, voice clipped. Medical records, ages 5 to 11, most with mild behavioral flags, no parents, most placed through Bell's non-profit. Each file had a photo stapled to the front. A child's face, a name, a birthday, a designation. Then came the stamp. Transfer pending. Site B over, and over again. Site B. What is Site B? Logan asked. Kessler didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because they both knew the answer wasn't in the files. Ranger let out a quiet whine. He stood at the far corner of the lab, head tilted, nose working the air. Then he looked at Logan. And moved. Fast. Where's he going? Kessler asked. He's found something. Logan said, already following. Ranger led them out of the lab, up the concrete stairs, and into the brittle afternoon light. The wind had picked up, cold and dry. Dust danced across the dirt road as the sun dropped behind the tree line. He didn't go back to the cruiser. He went to the field behind the house, across broken grass, over a low ridge, toward a rusted gate wrapped in ivy. Beyond it, something barely visible through overgrowth and weeds. Steel, tracks, abandoned rails hidden behind years of growth. Kessler slowed beside Logan, eyes narrowing. That wasn't on any map. It's old, Logan said. Used to be part of the freight spur. Ran north through the lumber yards, maybe 15 miles. Still live. Number supposedly cut off from the main line. Ranger walked the length of the track like he'd walked it before, each paw placed with certainty. He stopped at a wooden tie warped by time, nose lowering to a faint trail in the dirt. And barked. Once, short, sharp, clean. Logan crouched beside him. The smell hit him fast. Diesel and metal, recently disturbed. Beneath the rot of old machinery, there was something newer. "Something's been here," Logan said. "Not long ago." Kessler's phone buzzed. She picked up, listened, then held it to Logan. "Say that again," the voice on the line said. "We have unregistered train movement scheduled tonight. Private rail yard east of you, coded under a shell corp connected to Bell's charity. What time?" Logan asked. There was a pause. 10:14. It wasn't just a train. It was the train. "Where's the rail yard?" Kessler asked. 4 miles northeast, fenced, supposed to be decommissioned. "Can we intercept it?" "Maybe, but you'll need to move. It's already en route." Logan hung up. Ranger looked up at him, tail straight, breath shallow. "We go now," Logan said. The team mobilized in minutes, unmarked SUVs, tactical gear, radios crackling with roadblock positions. They moved through back roads, lights off, following the broken rail line north. Ranger sat in the front seat, alert, watching the tree line blur past. As they reached the last crossing before the yard, the first low vibration reached them through the ground. Steel against steel, the sound of a machine that shouldn't exist. And Ranger growled, low, deep, and certain. The train was coming, and it was right on time. The wind howled over the freight yard like it had something to say but couldn't find the words. Cracked asphalt groaned under the weight of approaching SUVs as Logan, Ranger, and the FBI task force rolled into position, headlights off, radios muted. The yard was supposed to be abandoned, just another relic left behind by progress. But tonight, it breathed like something alive. At the far end of the line, a train waited under a skeletal crane and rusted floodlights. No logos, no numbers, just matte black paint and shadows where windows should have been. And it was moving. Not fast, not loud, but steady. The kind of movement that didn't want attention, the kind built for disappearing. "That's it," Kessler said, watching from behind binoculars. "Thermal shows body heat in the last car. Too many signals, too small to be adults." She looked at Logan. "You ready?" He didn't answer. Ranger was already out of the vehicle, pacing beside the gravel, ears forward, every muscle wired. He knew. They didn't have time for negotiation or protocol. The engine had started to rev. In minutes, the train would be gone. "Go," Logan said into the mic. Flashlights clicked on. Agents swarmed. Boots pounded toward the last car. The doors were reinforced steel with side latches. Locked. Logan slammed the butt of his rifle into the release. Once. Twice. On the third hit, the latch snapped open with a metallic shriek. The door rolled wide, and all hell opened. Inside were rows of wooden crates stacked too high, each with a set of drilled air holes and padlocks. From within came shuffling, whimpering. Then a scream, high, sharp, desperate. Ranger lunged forward before Logan could stop him. He bounded over the threshold and into the dark. A gunshot exploded near the far end of the car. Then another. Muzzle flash lit up the interior for a blink. A figure in a dark jacket, weapon drawn, yelling orders in a language no one understood. More shots, but not at the agents, at the crates. "Cease fire!" Kessler yelled, pushing forward. Logan didn't wait. He climbed in, sweeping left, flashlight beam slicing through dust and steel. Children's eyes blinked through slats. Some screamed, some didn't make a sound. Too weak, too far gone. At the far end, Ranger collided with the gunman mid-stride. Teeth met flesh. The man's scream was short. The pistol dropped, clattered across the floor. Ranger didn't let go. He pinned the attacker with his full weight, jaws locked onto the man's forearm, driving him backward into the crate wall. "Hold!" Logan shouted, moving fast. The agents swarmed in. Hands yanked the attacker off the wall, zip ties snapping around wrists slick with blood. Ranger backed off only when Logan gave a single word. "Release." The shepherd growled one last time, deep and low, before retreating 2 steps and standing guard. The car was chaos now. Sobs, rusted hinges, cut locks, the sound of bolt cutters slicing chains that should have never been forged. One by one, crates were opened. Inside were children, some curled, some pressed against the walls, all blinking against the sudden light. A medic shouted from the entrance, "We need blankets. IVs, these kids are in shock." Logan opened a crate near the back. Inside, a boy around 9 stared up at him, with hollow eyes and chapped lips. Logan dropped to a knee, gently lifting the child into his arms. "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure it was true yet. Kessler appeared at his shoulder. 17 confirmed so far, still checking the rest. Another call from across the car. "I've got Isla. Breathing. Weak pulse." Logan rushed to the voice. There she was, curled in a crate with her knees pulled to her chest, braid tangled, face pale. An agent held her gently, checking vitals. Ranger walked over slowly, head low. He didn't bark. He just sat beside her crate and watched her. She opened her eyes, saw the dog, and reached out with a trembling hand. Ranger lowered his head and let her touch his muzzle. No growl, no shift. Just presence. Like he was saying, "I heard you." Logan exhaled hard, breath shaking, and turned away before the heat behind his eyes spilled over. Behind them, the train was being secured. Agents moved from car to car, clearing compartments, uncovering documents, finding discarded syringes, ledgers, ration packs. 20 children, chained, shipped, hidden, and nearly gone. Outside, ambulances lined the gravel lot, flashing red and blue against the black sky. Paramedics swarmed, wrapping blankets, carrying small bodies, whispering gentle lies. "You're going to be okay. You're safe now. You're going home." Logan stood beside the last ambulance, watching as Isla was lifted onto a stretcher. Ranger sat beside the wheels, refusing to move. The girl opened her eyes again. "Is he ours?" she asked faintly. Logan nodded. "He's yours." Ranger didn't need a command. He climbed into the back of the ambulance and lay down at her feet, head resting against her leg. He would ride with her. No one questioned it. No one dared. As the ambulance doors closed, Logan looked back at the train. Still. Silent. But not empty. Inside its walls were shadows of a system darker than anyone in Oak Hollow had ever imagined. And thanks to a girl's whisper and a dog who refused to look away, the machine had finally stopped. They found her in a pew, hands folded neatly in her lap, like she was waiting for a sermon that would never come. Clarissa didn't run, didn't flinch. She simply looked up at the agents entering the old clapboard church and said, "I wondered when you'd arrive." No resistance, no tears, just silence. They cuffed her in the aisle, between faded hymnals and peeling paint, while sunlight streamed through broken, stained glass and painted her face in fractured color. When they walked her out, the breeze rustled the pages of an open Bible left behind on the pulpit. Psalm 82, "Defend the weak and the fatherless." The federal trial came swiftly. Too many eyes, too much outrage. The story had already unraveled across morning. News segments, prime-time specials, and Senate subcommittees. 20 children. Shackled. Shipped. Abandoned like cargo. Clarissa Bell, once the quiet caseworker in a town that never asked questions, now stood accused of trafficking across state lines, endangerment, conspiracy, and something worse, something not written in the statute books. Betrayal. She never looked at the cameras, never glanced at the gallery. But Isla did. She walked into the courtroom, wearing a navy cardigan too big for her shoulders, and holding the hand of a woman she now called her guardian. Her braids were neat, her shoes polished, but her hands trembled. Ranger wasn't allowed inside the courtroom. So he waited outside, under the marble awning, just out of sight, but never out of mind. Logan stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the courthouse doors. Inside, Isla took the stand. The courtroom held its breath. She didn't cry. "My name is Isla Tran. I'm 10. I used to live at Bell Farm." The defense attorney shifted, almost impatiently. She continued. "There were more of us, kids. They said our parents didn't want us, that we'd go somewhere better. But some nights, when the train came..." She looked down, thumb twisting at her sleeve. "They took kids away. Only at night, always when the whistle blew." "Who took them?" the prosecutor asked gently. Isla hesitated. She never called them by name, just said it was time. She turned her head. Her gaze found Clarissa. She said we were lucky to be chosen. A murmur rippled across the gallery. "And what happened the night you were taken?" the prosecutor asked. Isla swallowed hard. "I was put in a box. It was cold. I could hear the train. Then the door slammed and it got dark." Her voice lowered. "I thought nobody would find me." Silence. Then, as if pulling courage from somewhere older than her years, she added, "But I heard barking. And footsteps. And then... nothing. Just breathing. Soft breathing. Right outside the door." She paused, tears glinting but not falling. "He stayed there until someone came. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stayed." The courtroom didn't move. Didn't breathe. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. "And who was he, Isla?" Her face finally broke into the barest smile. "Ranger." Outside, Logan glanced down. Ranger's ears twitched. Inside the courthouse, the spell broke. The prosecutor nodded and said, "No further questions." The defense didn't bother cross-examining. They knew. Clarissa sat stone still. No flicker of remorse. Just a woman who'd convinced herself the machine she helped run was too big to fail and too quiet to get caught. But now the silence had a witness. That afternoon, Isla stepped out of the courthouse to a sea of reporters. The cameras flashed. Voices shouted her name. She didn't answer. She only walked straight to Ranger, knelt beside him, and hugged his neck. The dog didn't move. He just stood like stone, letting her bury her face in his fur. She whispered something only he could hear. Logan put a hand on her shoulder. "You did good." She nodded but didn't speak. Later that week, the old Bell Farm was torn down. In its place, a community garden bloomed. Raised beds replaced rotting crates. Fruit trees were planted where fences once stood. And at the back of the plot, near the hedge line, a small wooden sign was hammered into the soil, in memory of those who stayed in silence. Ranger returned to that spot every morning. He'd sit near the first planter box, nose pointed at the rows of marigolds, tail brushing the dirt. He never barked, never moved, but his eyes stayed fixed on that space, not out of grief, but as if still listening, still watching, still guarding. Bell Farm was gone. Where the rotten wood and rusted cages once stood, now grew rows of sunflowers, strawberry beds, and towering beanstalks. Volunteers worked the soil with quiet reverence, careful not to disturb the single live oak that had been left untouched at the northern edge of the property. Its roots ran deep into a patch of ground no one dared walk over, because Ranger was there. The community had named it Ranger's Garden. No ceremony was held for the demolition of the farm itself. That had happened quietly, at dawn, with bulldozers and backhoes under the watchful eyes of the town's children. But the dedication of the garden, the rebirth, was something else entirely. They came from across counties, teachers, firefighters, nurses, the boys who once flinched at every whistle, the girls who now carried books under their arms instead of trauma on their backs. and in the center of the garden stood a statue, small but powerful. A bronze boy, barefoot, arm outstretched, palm turned upward to catch a beam of light carved from clear resin. At his feet, embedded in the cement base, were a trail of paw prints, delicately molded, impossibly lifelike. They led to where his foot touched ground. No name on the statue, just a quote engraved into the plaque beside it. He never moved. That's why they lived. Ranger had passed in his sleep a month earlier. His breathing had grown shallow, his steps slower, until one morning he simply didn't rise. Logan found him curled under the oak, in the very spot where he had once stood through rain and wind, refusing to leave Isla's boxcar door. No pain, no struggle, just rest. At last. They buried him beneath the tree's roots, wrapped in the same vest he'd worn the day he was pulled from retirement. The same vest that still bore the faded patch. USK 9 unit, retired, not broken. Logan hadn't spoken much since. His voice had become gravel, his silence heavier. But today he stood before the crowd, holding Isla's hand in one of his and a folded note in the other. Most people, he began, think loyalty is about obedience. He paused, eyes flicking to the statue. But real loyalty, it's about staying, not when it's easy, but when no one else does. He unfolded the note. It was handwritten, Isla's, though she'd asked him to read it. There was a night, he said, when I thought I was going to die, and I was okay with it. I was in the dark, alone. Then I heard breathing, slow, steady, and something pressed against the other side of the wall. He looked up. It didn't bark. It didn't scratch. It just stayed. The crowd was quiet. A few wiped tears. Some had traveled hours to be here, not knowing why until this very moment. Logan gestured toward the bronze statue behind him. There's a reason we built it like that. Because sometimes all it takes for a life to be saved is someone who doesn't move, who refuses to walk away. His voice caught, but he continued. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was a sentinel, a friend, a wall between the darkness and the kids inside it. He took a breath. And we built this garden so that no one forgets. Behind him, the garden rustled in the late afternoon breeze. Children ran between rows of tomatoes. A teen boy picked basil and handed it to an elderly woman with trembling hands. Life had returned. Isla stepped forward and whispered into the mic. I talk now, because he stayed. No one clapped. They didn't need to. It was sacred silence. After the ceremony, Logan returned to the base of the oak. He knelt, pressing a hand to the warm earth. Rest now, buddy, he said softly. You did it. As the crowd dispersed, one final question echoed, unwritten on any sign, unspoken by any mouth, but felt in the chest of every person who had once felt forgotten. What about you? Has anyone, animal or human, ever stayed for you when no one else did? If you felt this story, if you ever loved a dog who stood by you when the world turned away, share this. Tell someone about Ranger, and subscribe to the German Shepherd channel, where we honor those who listen when no one else does. Because sometimes all it takes is one who stays. The garden stood quiet. Seasons passed, children grew, and though Ranger was gone, his paw prints never truly faded. They whispered under the soil, in the rustle of leaves, in the way Isla still looked back whenever a door creaked open, half expecting the soft thud of a tail behind her. But justice, as Logan would learn, is rarely a straight line. One morning, just before sunrise, a letter arrived at his porch. No return address, only a government seal smudged at the corner. Inside was a classified report, redacted in thick black strokes, about Site C. No mention of Bell Farm, no mention of Isla. But 3 names on the final page matched children from Ranger's rescue. Children who were supposed to be safe, now missing again. Somewhere across the country, another system, darker, better funded, and far more protected, was still operating in the shadows. And this time, it wasn't just abandoned farms or off-the-grid train cars. It was digital, encrypted, and tied to military contractors Logan had never even heard of. He thought Ranger's watch had ended. He was wrong, because in the corner of a surveillance photo tucked inside the file, barely visible beneath a heat signature, was a shape. 4 legs, 1 upright ear, 1 eye glowing faintly from an old injury. Could it be? A new mission begins. But this time, the line between friend and enemy isn't so clear. Coming soon, Ghost's Watch, Part 2 of the Ranger Legacy series. He never moved, but what if something followed?